Good afternoon and welcome to the Mesa City Council study session for the afternoon of February the 25th. All of our council is present. The first item on our agenda for this meeting is to review the agenda items for tonight's council meeting. So council, please refer to that document. It's the same agenda that we reviewed last Thursday. Currently, there are no items off of the consent agenda. In the interim, council, any questions come up on anything on the agenda for tonight? Mr. Brady, anything new on the anything on the consent agenda that we need to go over?
We covered it on Thursday.
Yeah, we did have some presentations on some of the items here.
Yes.
So if there's nothing else, then we'll just move on to the next agenda item, which is item 2, to hear a presentation and provide direction on regulating bicycles and scooters that are staged in the city right-of-way. Appreciate this is a very timely topic, not just in Mesa, Arizona, but literally I think every city in the United States is having similar meetings to this one. Appreciate our great transportation department taking the lead on this.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Members of the council, good evening. Again, RJ Zeter with the Transportation Department, and with me is Eric Guderian, our Deputy Director for Traffic Engineering. So in addition, we have staff from the City Attorney's Office. There are members of the industry who are here with us this evening as well. So we will jump right in. Just again to reinforce the definition of what we're calling a shared active transportation vehicle. I think that what I want to ensure that is understood is that we are only seeking to regulate the placement of commercially rented scooters and bikes that are placed in the public right-of-way. So this would not affect someone who bought their child, a motorized scooter, or someone who owned one personally, but we're really focusing on the potential of licensing the placement of these vehicles these scooters in our right-of-way for rent. Insurance and indemnification. We've been working with Mr. Smith's staff on this question. We have had some interest from several of the operators to work through what the indemnification and insurance requirements are. This has been an issue in several other cities in the valley, if you're following some of the conversation that has taken place. So this is a work in progress. And if council does direct us to put together actual licensing terms for council action, this is something we'll have to nail down. To reinforce what staff is recommending at this stage is that as part of the terms and conditions and changes to city code, again, the term staging, this is when the companies place the scooters or bikes within our right-of-way for rent. So you'll hear that term, staging. And that's the initial placement of the vehicles. Then, of course, the customers leave them at different places in the city when they finish their ride. So currently, there is in city code a prohibition on vending in city parks. So this just continues that the vehicles cannot be placed in city parks. But for example, if you went over to Pioneer Park nearby, you will see that the scooters and bikes are staged on the public sidewalk surrounding the park, so there is access, but just adjacent to the parks. We are recommending that there be no staging on residential streets and private property without permission of the property owner. When we get into the geographic areas that the vehicles could be placed, this would not prohibit someone from parking a vehicle at the end of their ride on a residential street. So what we want to try to do is allow the operators, again, within that targeted area, that would regulate the actual staging, but it would not keep a user from extending beyond those staging limitations. Another thing that we are recommending as part of the terms and conditions is to try to limit the number and distance of the shared transportation vehicles parked near transit stops. Transit connections, first mile, last mile, certainly is a goal of micromobility. The concern we have at times is that the sheer number of scooters or bikes, sometimes they get parked in the bus shelters, or users leave them in the shelters. They get knocked over and create access issues and that kind of thing. And then additionally limit the number of shared transportation vehicles parked in a row. When we drafted the presentation, we discussed regardless of how many operators are there. And we've gotten some feedback on this one since we began the conversation. And the concern is, and I think there's some validity, that if we said there can only be 10 scooters at a location, then is it a game like a race? You know, that the first operator gets in there at 4 o'clock in the morning, so they get their scooters there, and then the next operator can't stage there because they were beat, you know, to sort of the punch. And does that create a challenge where the scooter is getting staged earlier and earlier as each vendor is trying to get ahead of? So I think if we are regulating the spacing requirements and perhaps the overall numbers parked in a row, I think we can effectively deal with this. And again, the concern is that when you have 20, 25 scooters in a single location, there's an aesthetic issue, but more importantly, again, there's a blocking the right-of-way and the sidewalks and the ramps issue. And again, maintaining Americans with Disabilities Act compliance to ensure that the vehicles are not staged in such a way that they're limiting that minimum clearance space along our public sidewalks. Next slide is what, again, we're proposing. We haven't called this a pilot program, but this would be really a way to more formally kick off the staging and operation of scooters and bikes in Mesa. We know from our visual observations, what we're seeing is that west, kind of downtown Mesa area along transit corridors is really where we're seeing the vast majority of these scooters and the one operator that has bikes being placed. So the recommendation is to limit the staging from Southern Avenue, east to Gilbert Road, north to University, and then jogging a little bit as it heads over towards Riverview and Sloan Park. We believe that starting with a more defined area will allow us to evaluate the actual usage over time. We would maintain the flexibility that if there is demand beyond this area, and we see how the program is running, that there's always the potential to expand this area. This would not, at least what we're talking about today, prohibit someone from riding a scooter or a bike outside of the proposed service area. You'll hear terms like geofencing and geospeeding. So we're not suggesting that if you rent a scooter at Stapley in Maine, you have to stop at Gilbert in Maine and get off. It's just that the company would have to pick that vehicle back up and then bring it back into the staging service area for the next day. Customer service, we've talked about this before. One of the things we've asked for from all of the operators is to have a local staff member who we can contact directly rather than having to go through an email address or sort of a national, customer service hotline, that we have a person that we can talk to quickly if we are having any issues. We're asking that a serial number be visible with operator contact information. Again, this is if we're having problems with the placement or location of one of the vehicles, and also that the vehicles be restaged every 24 hours. If you go back in time to when the bikes first showed en masse, there were the two operators that came into town. One of the challenges we had at that time was if there were problems with the placement of the bikes, one of the operators was better than the other in terms of being responsive to that. One of the good things about the electric vehicles is that they do need to be physically touched, meaning they have to either be picked up for charge, or my understanding is with the bicycles, the battery has to be removed. So the good news is that if there are stray vehicles, that there's a regular sort of restaging and recalibration of that. And then also we would ask that any complaints from citizens or business owners be addressed within 24 hours. Outreach, this is something we discussed with council. Safety obviously being a concern regarding the operation of the scooters and the bikes. So we would build into the terms and conditions that any operator operating within Mesa would be required to do outreach events, workshops, et cetera. So for example, we have Cyclo Mesa coming up not too far down the road here in the spring. Perhaps one or more of the vendors could, set up a tent or something with safety information and also provide helmets. We have movies in the parks. We're doing some safety education in schools, although the target audience is not minors. But just this is something we have to develop. But the idea that we would ask the operators to partner with the city in doing that kind of safety outreach. Other user requirements are that for the stand-up scooters, we would seek or recommend a maximum speed limit. They can be governed through their technology at 15 miles per hour, and that the electric pedal assist bicycles have a maximum assisted speed of 20 miles an hour. I wanted to reinforce that we are not recommending a cap on the number of operators in the city. We would let the market decide that, so that if council so directs us to move forward with formalizing the terms and condition and the licensing requirements, that anybody that meets these requirements could come obtain a license from the city and operate in our right-of-way. Fees, we'll show you on the next slide where Mesa would fall based on our research. We did take the consensus, at least from council, that perhaps we should increase what we had originally proposed in our fees. Again, we're not seeking to, quote, make money through this program, but rather receive enough revenue that we can cover our administrative costs for overseeing the program. So the proposal is an annual $5,000 base license fee, and then a $2 per month fee based on the maximum number of vehicles that each operator had in the city for any given month. And that in the event we have to impound a vehicle, we would seek a $100 fee for the operator to retrieve that. We also have some data sharing requirements. We'd like to know the numbers of trips that are being taken, miles, if any crashes are reported to the operator, and we'd like to see where the vehicles are actually being placed to sort of see what the market is doing in the form of a heat map. A minor point, but we are asking that the operators not sublet to smaller groups of operators, so that we have an umbrella company and they're not breaking that into pieces, and that's, again, just from a management standpoint. And then lastly, this is a slide that sort of shows where Mesa would land if this is a fee structure that council is comfortable with. So if you go down to the middle in the gray area, you'll see Mesa proposed, again, with the $5,000 annually and the $2 a month. Assuming 300 vehicles, and it obviously scales up depending on the number, but we'll just use the first column, that would generate about $12,000 per year. Currently, we have 5 operators in the city, so you can do the math, and it would be just over $60,000 a year in fees that would be collected at this point, and we'll have to better evaluate it over time, but we do think that would be sufficient to cover the program oversight, both from the licensing administrative standpoint, as well as to having folks monitor the vehicles in the field. And I know I went through that pretty quickly, but I know you have another meeting to move on to. But staff is seeking authorization to move forward to actually create ordinance, terms and conditions, and a license. And we look forward to your questions and direction.
Thank you very much. Council, question, we do have a blue slip to talk or hear from the public on this, but maybe before we move to that, let's ask the questions that you might have. Mr. Thompson.
I guess I struggle a little bit with over-regulating. You know, like for example, the major transit corridor, the boundary map that you have. While it's good for light rail and that last mile that we talk about, you know, we have bus routes throughout our entire city that a lot of people utilize, that last mile would work too. So if you do this as a pilot, I think I'd probably be okay with a pilot looking at this boundary map, but if we're talking about limiting it only to that boundary, I'd look to broaden that map a little bit to take in the city and the bus routes so that it can truly be used as that last mile that we've always talked about with transit. I like the idea of having a customer service, somebody local, staff that we can go to when we have issues, because I know that was some of the complaints that we had before was that, you know, even though their products were in our city, we couldn't reach anybody or reach out to anybody or get a hold of anybody to resolve issues that we had. I don't know. Some of the stuff I just look at, the user requirements, you know, with the max speeds and different things like that. It seems like it's really kind of limiting the operability, I guess, of the SATV. I was looking for the word. I had to find it real quick, of the SATV and so forth. And I just want to make sure that we're not overburdening or over-regulating the companies that are trying to come here to Mesa to try something new. So that's all I've got.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. You pointed out the potential problem of a company, a race to the street corner. And, the first ones that arrive can stake and plant their flag there and put out their 10 scooters and preempt, someone else from coming in and adding to the inventory at that corner, because there would be a limitation on the number of vehicles that can be staged in any one location. I didn't hear the solution to that problem. What happens if we have 5 or 6 folks come in and say, yes, here's my $5,000, I'm purchasing a license, but then they go out the next morning to place their vehicles and they're prohibited because their competitors have taken all the street corners in town?
Mayor, thank you. On this topic, this is only speaking with one of the operators last week after they reviewed the presentation or the draft presentation. The suggestion was maybe we limit the number of scooters per operator at a specific location and then have some separation requirements so that, for example, any of the 5 operators that are here in the city today could place their scooters, but rather than just having it be wide open, we could say you can have 10 scooters at a location, or 5. Part of the challenge in this is not every location has the same capacity to place the scooters. So I think we need to focus this one, a little more. But we're trying to strike balance and not over-regulating, but yet dealing with the potential saturation at a specific location.
Okay, so you're aware, obviously, you pointed that out.
Yes.
That this is a potential problem, and so by the time it came back to us with some draft ordinance language or a licensing agreement, you would make suggestions to address that specific issue, is that?
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay. Couple other questions. I'm very interested, the helmet idea seems fascinating to me, because I think what you see in other cities is that the agreement that you agree to when you swipe your app over the vehicle or something always says, thou shalt wear a helmet, and it's uniformly ignored. So the idea that we would ask them to donate X number of helmets to the city, and then I guess we would just go out at events and figure out a way to try to distribute those helmets to the public, or?
I think it could actually be a combination that perhaps the city had an inventory of helmets, but that we would encourage the vendors to come out themselves, and pitch their own product and, push out helmets.
Mayor, I think the goal here was just to get
more helmets on people in Mesa. Ideally, if it's associated with a scooter, even better. It just has to be someone on the bike too. We're better off. So we were just trying to figure out a public purpose here, and we're just, the distribution part is, I think, the part. And maybe we could work with downtown businesses too, so that people could go into those businesses to get the helmets too. So we're just trying to figure out how to distribute those and recognize they're important. But the enforcement of wearing helmets, even without scooters, just for bikes, is obviously very difficult, so.
I guess there's no bad way to distribute helmets to the community. The more helmets, the better, and we just figure out ways to do that. So I was just curious to know what thoughts you had on that.
Vendors will just mail you a helmet if you just ask them for one, and you just pay shipping.
Yes, that's correct. At least one of the operators, perhaps more, but that's correct. That's embedded in their program. Some of this is based on actual conversation with the operators that pretty across the board, they've expressed a willingness to do community participation in encouraging helmet use and getting them out there. So this really hasn't been a topic of disagreement, with the operators. I did want to follow up on a comment that Councilmember Thompson made. The speed limits that we are recommending actually are based on conversations with the various operators. So certainly they can respond, but we did not arbitrarily select those numbers.
I have one more question, and before I give up the microphone. You preface this by saying that this is an ordinance that's directed only at folks that are renting these vehicles. We're not proposing an ordinance that applies to electric scooters or bicycles that perhaps might be gifted to minors at Christmas time or other ways. And it seems like other communities take a different, Scottsdale, for example, I think they've chosen not to enter into licensing agreements or to regulate the commercial side of this, but rather they have a city ordinance that deals with the vehicles. And so I'm wondering, should we also have an ordinance that if the electric scooter vehicle is a phenomenon that's going to be popular beyond just, the last mile type commercial activity, do we need an ordinance addressing this new technology that's not just for rent, but for sale?
So Mayor, Council, I'd just jump in, RJ. I think that the private enterprise, we're not worried about someone leaving those parked in front of someone's property or a lot of the concerns that are arising with these vendors that are leaving them or having them left out on the public right of way. So I think that's why we kind of focused on this specifically. We figure a private enterprise is going to go from their home back to their home, and it doesn't necessarily create the same demand for us as far as right-of-way management. I think that relates more to safety and
Right.
how they're riding it and where they're riding is maybe a different focus than really what this primarily focuses on.
So at least at this point, we don't see an unmet need for regulation on that
I
area.
don't think we're
Yeah.
seeing that, are you guys?
No.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thompson, you have another?
Yeah,
comment?
back to the number or limiting the number on the corner. I know that during the last presentation, we talked about, the cost of the scooters, for the commercial cost, I guess, that it costs the companies to manufacture these scooters and deploy them. Is it really a concern that there's gonna be an overabundance of scooters that are gonna be left strewn throughout the community on corners, and there's gonna be an oversaturation that nobody's gonna be utilizing the scooters? Because, if I had a product that was, $1,400, $1,500 or what have you, I certainly wouldn't want to deploy it somewhere where it's not being utilized, because that's not making money, for me. I'd want them deployed somewhere where I'm making money, where I can be competitive. And so if there's, 20 scooters on a corner, then I obviously don't want to go on that corner. I want to go on another corner where there's not 20 scooters so that I have a better chance of mine being utilized over the next guy. So do we really need to limit the number or, per vendor, or is that just, again, is that a market call?
Councilmember Thompson, visually, and the numbers show this, that the numbers of scooters have varied quite considerably since they were first launched. What we've seen is, and this is anecdotal, kind of our visual observation, is that we've seen a new vendor come in, and they come in with a bunch, right? And this is more opinion, that I think the companies are trying to get brand recognition. So I think they are using the scooter or the bike itself as advertising for their, brand. Given that there's now 5 operators in town and they want, vendor B to stand out from, vendor A, kind of thing. So part of it's going to be an observation over time as well that, what's this market going to look like in a year? Will there be 5? Will there be 10? Will there be fewer, than 5? That's kind of an unknown at this point, and we can observe this. There have been locations that, in mine and staff's opinion, that there have been more scooters placed than there would likely be rentals, and that I believe that part of that was to get name recognition, which I understand, but this is part of managing the public right of way. We've had some observations where, a row of scooters will get knocked down and then you could have a dozen or more scooters blocking, the sidewalk. And that happens when, and the more there are, the more likely, I think, the opportunity to create some impediments for folks trying to use our sidewalks.
Thank you. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mayor. RJ, thanks for your work. First of all, I know this is a lot of work for staff to put this all together and frameworking this for us. I have 4 questions or thoughts. Number one, on the staff time. You talked about staff time, how to manage the program, but we really don't know what it's going to cost because we haven't done the program. So I think in the future, as we move forward, is that you'll probably have to reevaluate our ROI on that and just to manage that. So the other part was on I feel it's important that we track our accidents that we have with these scooters, or whether police or fire, with either our MCTs or other, so we can have a idea, and again, through the vendors, we can track those. The other thought I had was using CityLink as an app to utilize that to report any scooters that might be MIA out in the community. And that will allow the vendor, and I know the vendors can track them GPS-wise, but if we have to impound them, then obviously staff has to go out and collect that, whether it's a police car or transportation or other vehicle. Might be even the city manager's car, who knows? But regardless, I think, an impound fee using City Link app would be really good. Maybe explain to me the insurance indemnity part of it, the language. I didn't quite understand. It was kind of a broad language, what that meant, because it said, what did it say? The operator's responsible for all injuries? Okay. Mr. Smith, does that happen?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, we're working on the indemnity language and the insurance language. In fact, we're looking at other cities outside of even Arizona for language that other cities, including Los Angeles, have utilized and the vendors have agreed to in regards to both the indemnity and the insurance. Indemnity and insurance are sort of interlaced, they work together. One is the insurance, in which most people are familiar with that, and the concept of being able to provide an insurance that'll cover the injury or the damages in the event of property damage or injury in the case of personal injury. Indemnity is a concept in which we will look for the operator to defend the city and hold us harmless in those events in which, and in many situations like this, you'll see an allegation in which a plaintiff will bring an allegation of negligence for either permitting, allowing these, or some crack in the sidewalk, or some minor factor in which they are claiming that the city is somehow responsible in order to draw the city into a potential lawsuit. And so we'll look both in the indemnity and insurance to make sure that the operators, and by operators I mean the companies, both defend us and hold us harmless, and that they have insurance that backs that up. And so we're still working on that language. We'll provide it to the industry. We'll work with them. As RJ pointed out, that's happened in some neighboring jurisdictions, and we've seen how that's gone, and we'll see how it goes with us. Like I said, we're looking at other cities, including, like I named, Los Angeles, in which they have signed broad form indemnities. And so we will seek the same protections that the industry has agreed to in other major municipalities.
Thank you. One last question. How many vendors do we currently have, and how many are expected potentially to come into the program?
We currently have 5 operators in the city: Jump, Lyft. Jump has both scooters and bikes. Lyft, Lime, Spin, and Bird. There's a 6th operator operating near us that is actually a representative here tonight from Razor. So they're following what's happening on Mesa. They haven't launched here yet, so there's the potential for a 6th. We know that nationwide there are more operators than what we've seen in the valley. So we'll see how far it goes.
So I like our framework and how you're progressing, so I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we do need to give staff some direction, but maybe before we do that, we do have one person that's expressed an interest in speaking, so maybe we should hear from them. This person is from Razor, Donovan Higbee. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeremy, do you have something?
Just a couple
Oh, excuse me.
sorry,
Before we do that,
if I
please.
could. The things that I noticed on this, what's the reason that we're not allowing the staging at the parks?
I think it's, and Mr. Hirschberg can speak better to this than I, but we have seen some issues where people using the scooters are doing, for lack of a better term, donuts, inside the parks on the basketball courts and that stuff, and scuffing them up pretty bad, that then requires cleaning. But there's a
under
general
this,
prohibition.
They could ride their bike into a park.
They could. We're
scooter
not
into a park.
seeking to prohibit that, but there's a general prohibition today on vending not allowed within the parks.
Yeah, I
so
think
we're
that's
following
more
that.
it than the actual, there's probably an opinion about whether we want to stage scooters inside park, but I think it has to do with the vending rule. So it'd be another ordinance that's being impacted by this, I
Correct.
believe. So that's why we allow for it on the outside the perimeter, and you could certainly, at least under this license, you could ride your scooter through the park. You could leave it there, but we're just asking the vendors to, when they staged it originally, to do it outside of the park boundaries.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. And on the residential street staging, so if I understand correctly, if somebody requests a scooter specifically to their house, we're still permitting the drop-off on the sidewalk in front of that individual's house.
With their
Rather,
permission.
we just aren't allowing them to stage openly wherever they want.
Right, as long as they have permission of the
Property owner.
property
Yes.
owner.
Yes.
And how will we determine if a person requested the scooter or if they just staged, or will it just be the honor system?
Well, it would be an honor system, but then let's say we got a complaint, we would have to follow up with that particular operator and say, hey, there was this scooter placed on, X street, and they would respond, that was at the owner's request that we place a scooter or bike.
Most
in
of,
front
most
their
everything is gonna be driven by a complaint basis, right? That's why we would go out and investigate. It's gonna be, unless we're observing it on our own, but most likely it's gonna be a complaint-driven.
Like if somebody complains that a scooter was dropped in front of their house that they didn't
Right,
request.
right,
Correct.
right.
And I know we talked briefly on the transit stops. What are we suggesting is gonna be the limit per operator at each transit stop, or is that?
We had, and I have a note slide, we had proposed a lower number of just several. Based on the conversations that I've had with Mr. Brady, but also with the industry, I think we need to raise that so that there's, adequate access to the scooters or the bikes, at transit stops.
I didn't catch that. Well,
Sorry, we haven't settled on the exact number. Our initial thought was a low number, as in no more than 2 or 3. But based on feedback that we've gotten, we think we probably should raise that.
So at the stations,
To the stations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, so if somebody gets off a bus and they need to take a scooter or a
Yeah,
bike to their house and,
right, I think the philosophy here, if this is the intent, this is to be the microtransit, next mile, quarter mile, then I think we actually want to encourage several scooters to be at those locations. So I think we would, we'd be very generous, I guess, on what the number is, and I think there's capacity for that. I noticed, and that's what we typically see today, right? We see it at bus stops, we see it at transit locations, and we see it at intersections. It's typically, or bike racks.
Correct.
so I've seen in some other cities where they've sort of taken the sidewalks and painted them with maybe like diagonal lines for staging areas for SATVs. Are we incorporating anything like that in the program? We say like, this is the designated area for SATVs, or have we not got, are we not planning to get that specific?
Councilmember, we have not at this point. It'd be quite an effort to try to go out and mark every location where a scooter or bike could possibly be placed. And that's why we just want to establish general criteria that ensure sidewalk access is maintained, that if you're at a transit shelter, you're not parked in the shelter. There's ADA accessible spaces or seating, areas within the shelters. So we're trying to stay more, provide a general set of rules, rather than having to go out and police, are you parked exactly within a painted area or something along those lines.
Okay. On that topic of ADA, have we seen a significant number of ADA complaints in regards to the SATVs?
Councilmember, we have not, to my knowledge, received any ADA complaints. Visually, when we're out and about, we see where either, and sometimes it's the operators, and then we follow up with them that, they may park a series of scooters perpendicular across the sidewalk and there's not enough clear space to get by. Or it could be a user leaving a scooter in a bus shelter. But we've not received any complaints. But visually, we have seen a number of obstructions that we've had to follow up with the companies on.
Okay. And the presentation where you had the fee schedule, how did we come up with those costs?
Initially, we did some calculation. This number, Councilmember Freeman noted this, part of our challenge right now, Councilmember Whitaker, is that we don't exactly know how much time it's going to take to administer this program. That's something we will need to track. And we have the potential to come back down the road and adjust the fees either up or down to reflect the actual project administrative costs. So this is really based on the research we've done around the country, and you can see it on the slide. From bottom to top, there's quite a spread, on what the fees could be generated. We've taken kind of a middle of the road approach, and this would allow us, the tax and license folks have to administer the licensing process. Our folks have to do sort of the day-to-day administration of the program. We may need to go out and do some sidewalk cleaning in downtown. I had an email from Downtown Mesa Association last week, with some pictures, of some marked up, sidewalks. So I think this is something we'll have to follow, but we're comfortable that we're not overcharging at this point. But at the same time, we think we're going to reasonably recover our costs.
So, Mayor, Councilman Whitaker, I think one of the reasons too that this follows the philosophy of why we create a defined area, because what we thought is this would help, we could manage this, we could allocate resources of the staff, about maybe not quite a full person, but generally a person to kind of be monitoring and responding to the calls. And that's why I think we also kind of backed into the number saying, okay, how many scooters do we reasonably think may be out in the circulation that we covered under this license? And so anywhere between 30 and 60,000, that's kind of we were trying to get to. But also why we contained the area where the scooters would be, because obviously that would help us to administer that better. But it would allow us to expand it, right, if the interest grows and the revenues come in. So that's a lot of different thought that went into that.
Got it. The next question I have is on the reporting requirements for the vendors. So I know we talked about a heat map that shows like where these things are distributed. Do we require that today of like taxi cab companies or Lyft or Uber or Waymo or any other shared travel companies? Or is this specific to SATVs?
This is specific to SATV. I'm not aware that we regulate any of the other forms, but we also don't see the Ubers and the Lyfts parking their motorized vehicles, you know, within our right-of-way.
Gotcha.
For rent,
So the goal is to make sure that they're being distributed where they're supposed to.
We'd just like to, yes, but we'd like to see how they're being used, you know, and it may be that, you know, we're looking to see where drop-off locations are too, you know, and that could help decide.
We may
determine if
expand
need
the
to
area
expand the
because of
area.
this. This may be the justification for why the area that we have defined could move around, right? If they could say, hey, look, we've got a hotspot outside of your area, then that may give us justification to move that.
We're certainly not looking for any personally identifiable information. This is just, you know, sort of, you know, anonymous reporting in the aggregate.
Okay. I think you addressed some of my other concerns. I don't believe in the limiting of the SATVs because I personally think that if we limit the supply of them, it's just gonna allow the ones that get their scooters out there to drive up the cost due to the lack of supply. The other thing is on that map that we have, you know, to Kevin's point, you know, I know we have bus routes that go all along the 60 and all the way up to the east side of Mesa. You know, and I think that there's people that are becoming reliant on the SATVs, whether it's bikes or the scooters, for transportation, whether it's to and from work, school, or whatever it may be. So it's my opinion that this is too restrictive, and at a minimum, you know, I think we're limiting the forms of transportation that people have access to, you know. So I think that this area is way too small. I wouldn't even agree with a limited area whatsoever. That's all the questions I have.
Mayor, Councilmember Whitaker, I just wanted to add one thing. One of the other reasons, a code that would be affected in parks, we don't allow any motorized or motorized assisted vehicles in parks, so these would fall underneath that. So it's another, that's the main reason also why that we're not allowing in the park. So they're staged outside.
Got
Because we
it.
don't allow those types of vehicles in the parks.
Makes sense, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Luna.
This is just a pilot, right? We're gonna do this for a certain period of time to determine what works and what doesn't work. And then if we decide to expand the area, then we can do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Mayor,
I think you're not trying to use the word pilot, you're just trying to originate
Right,
here, and with
originate
the
here.
opportunity, we can expand it.
we will need to make some changes to city code.
Right.
You know, and then obviously have council approve the license and terms and conditions. But we can certainly come back and report how successful the program is.
So at that time, you'll determine what works and what didn't work and
Sure.
oversaturation or not.
We could come back in
Yeah.
6 months and report to council on where we're at.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
How are we gonna figure out what works in the areas that are grayed out if they're not allowed to distribute the SATVs to those areas?
But I think that's the point of the heat map, right? We can see where they're dropping them off if there's a demand further out. And maybe there's a way to do surveys. We could talk to the industry about that. I think the question is, sometimes you see an isolated one that's extended far out, you know, past Gilbert Road, and for us to then have to go, you know, just having to manage those drop-offs or staging could be very difficult for us.
Thank you. Jen?
I have a few questions. First of all, I had inquired with I was curious if any of the vendors could provide for us the number of rides or whatever in and out of the proposed transit area? Like, let's say if 80% is in the transit area versus 20% is outside, or any information on that, just to look at where the demand is. Also, on the scooter limitation, would they be able to replenish through the day? Let's say there's 10. And let's say all the 10 are out, would they be able to replenish, or they have a limitation, or has that been decided?
Councilmember Duff, I think it's at the discretion of the operator. You know, we're looking to set, you know, sort of basic, you know, criteria, and it's really up to how the business model works. I think for the individual business, you know, that if scooters are shifting throughout the city, there's nothing that would prohibit one of the operators from restaging, you know, during the day rather than only doing it once a day. I think part of that's going to be driven by demand, and, you know, and we're not seeking to regulate at that level.
Yeah. I'd like to see the amount, if we regulate the number at a point flex according to high transit areas versus low. Along the light rail, maybe it would be higher versus some stops on the outer perimeter, and so we could flex the numbers perhaps.
Okay.
Also, regarding ADA complaints, I have got quite a few in the downtown area, in the neighborhoods, because we do have some senior developments, and so they are just being sometimes dumped in. So there has been some complaints around in the neighborhoods that are connected. And last comment is looking at maybe expanding the transit area to a bus stop area just to the east or so, knowing that a lot of people will be using it for the last gap, maybe from the bus to the rail, to fill it up. So if there was the last bus stop as you go east, you know, the transit would maybe Lindsay Road or something like that, wherever that is, and that to be allowed to have scooters so that people can complete that last gap of the bus stop to the rail. I think that's the majority of what I had in comments on. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and hear this blue card and then give the direction that staff has asked for. Is that all right? So let's invite Mr. Donovan Higbee to come forward, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Donovan Higbee, and I work on the government relations team at Razor. I was here a few study sessions ago to kind of give you a brief introduction on me and our company. We are excited that the City of Mesa is embracing shared micromobility and look forward to working with you in that capacity. Our company has been in active correspondence with the city since last year, and we are grateful for the frequent updates and communication from staff. Razor is proud to support the regulatory framework that your staff has presented to you this evening, including the proposal for a $2 per month per vehicle fee. We appreciate you being attentive to the realities of operating this business in a competitive market, while some other cities have elected to impose costly fee structures that truly inhibit our long-term sustainability. However, we would like to highlight one concern we have as a final ordinance is being drawn up. We would strongly advise the city to avoid overly broad indemnification language that other cities such as neighboring Tempe as well as Los Angeles have proposed for their dockless programs, which would inhibit the ability for any operator to viably conduct business in Mesa. We understand the city's need to protect itself from litigation and are happy to work with your staff on indemnification language that has worked for other operators and other cities throughout the country. Thank you in advance for your consideration of our concerns. And I do also want to mention in response to one of your questions and comments earlier about helmets. As part of our launch strategy in every new market that we're approved in, we do hold community events whenever we do launch, and we will distribute free helmets to members of the community, and we'll educate riders so they can test out our scooters. And we will also ship free helmets to anyone who requests one by either calling or emailing our company. So I just wanted to point that out as well, that safety continues to be our top priority in this business. As always, please let me or my colleagues on your local Razor team know if you have any questions or how we can support your efforts moving forward. And again, we support the framework, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Higbee. Any other requests to speak? Okay. Well, I support the recommendations of staff. I support moving forward with asking them to come back with an ordinance for our adoption regarding having a franchise, or not a franchise, a license opportunity. I like specifically some of the bullet points that were included in the staff presentation about not staging in residential private property neighborhoods. I think they just seem out of place in that context. I like the geo-fencing concept as well, although I do share some of the concerns that have been expressed here about there's a lot of transit that occurs east of Gilbert Road. And I think there are going to be a lot of folks that get off the bus at Power Road, and their only option is to, walk the last, however long the rest of their trip is. So I do think we need to be sensitive to the fact that we may have started, a little bit short in terms of the geography of how we want to do this. So we might rethink extending that a little bit, particularly around our transit lines. I appreciate I hope that the industry, I think Mr. Higbee just made this comment, but clearly the city's not looking at this as an opportunity to milk this industry and make money off of this. Our proposed fees are very modest, and I suspect that they are too modest. We're literally half of the Phoenix fee. We charge the same amount for a 6-month license that Phoenix charges, for an annual license that Phoenix charges for a 6-month license. So I think and once we get into this program and we realize it's probably going to require more staff time than we think it is right now, and if we go to the idea of actually painting, sidewalks we think that's a more efficient way to stage these. I can see that we likely are going to have to raise the fees on this at some point. But I do appreciate the fact that we're sending the message that we want to encourage and invite this industry to come into Mesa, and so we're starting as low as possible. But I won't be surprised if we have to raise rates at some point. So having said, and the indemnity issue to me is a make or break issue, no pun intended. So I think we do need to, it sounds like in other cities, this has certainly been an issue, and some businesses have chosen not to do business in those cities because they don't like the indemnity requirements. On the other hand, several have embraced that and are willing to do that. So to me, it's not a matter of if. We know that there will be litigation related to this. We know there will be injuries related to this, and to me, that is a deal breaker if we don't have proper indemnification as part of the franchise agreements. Mr. Thompson.
I agree, Mayor. And Jim or Chris, maybe one of you may know, is that why Scottsdale maybe didn't move towards a licensing agreement? Because when you develop a licensing, then you have a liability in that versus just having an ordinance that speaks specifically to the use of motorized scooters or electric scooters and bicycles?
Mayor and Councilmember Thompson, I don't know why they did, but simply doing it by ordinance without terms and conditions or licensing doesn't result in them not being subject to a lawsuit. I don't remember, I did actually read the ordinance, but I don't remember whether or not they embedded quite a bit within their ordinance. And so I just can't remember if they embedded some type of indemnification within the ordinance. But the fact that they don't have a license doesn't mean that they won't get sued. So. And Mayor and Council, I'll put it in some context too on the indemnity. Broad form indemnity, the city has a number of canal pass, and it's actually SRP has the canal pass, and we've improved them for bicycling and for other improvements. SRP requires the city to give a broad form indemnity on those canal pass, because those are their paths, and they're not the ones trying to draw people to walk across those paths. And so we sign a broad form indemnity to just give you a concept for utilization of those paths. And so the idea that the industry can't insure over the risk, that's what happens, is you insure over the risk. And so the city, in appropriate context, when it has had to provide a broad form indemnity in that context. And so you have to sort of see it within the context and the insurance.
Thank you. Frankie.
Yep. I just echo your thoughts, Mayor. One of the issues that I have is on the boundary map. So if we can look at transit areas and maybe expand to those areas, that, I'll feel much more comfortable in doing that. I know in my district, I've seen a lot of on almost go past the south of the 60, just, it's far to walk, so these scooters, allow for folks to get to their place of work or, residency. So I would say if we can expand that map, that is something that I would be in favor of, so.
Okay, yes, Mr. Luna.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the things that's gonna happen, the completion of the light rail, which is gonna happen in May, we wanna make sure and ensure that, anyone riding the light rail, especially going towards east, has the opportunity, if they choose to have a razor or a bird, have access to that. So if we can look at that, especially particularly in the east side, I think that's something. And then if you go south to southern, we wanna make sure that they're able to access as well. So that's what I would recommend.
So I think we're already at Southern, we're at Gilbert. What I hear you saying is maybe look at some of the bus routes and maybe going further east and a little bit further south. Is that accurate? Come back with something like that?
Chris, do we have ridership counts through Valley Metro for bus usage?
Oh, yeah.
And, maybe what we do instead is look at the highest propensity bus routes and perhaps expand the area, the boundary out to those high propensity areas where people are utilizing the buses, and maybe that last mile is what needs to be served.
What about people that don't have access to the buses or the light rail? They just walk?
I think we also could look at hotspots, maybe around ASU Polytech or some places like that. Are areas that require a lot of transit, a lot of movement, and it could tag those on possibly too.
Yeah, we looked at ASU Poly, and the problem with ASU Poly is they prohibit it on the campus, and everything around there is housing. It's probably not ideal. At least that's their initial feedback, that it just, there's an airport, there's housing. It just, we couldn't find a really good drop-off center there, so, because the buses go onto the campus, so that creates the problem, so.
I think the fact that we're asking for so much data from these companies demonstrates that we're open to discuss, utilization, and if there's hot spots around the community.
Oh, yeah, no, I think, yeah, there could be shopping centers and other places. I think we'll look at extending that, and I think the idea is, we wanted to kind of, before we overextend ourselves and being able to start with something we can manage is kind of contain it a little bit, see how well it works, see how well the vendors respond to this. And actually, they've been doing a very good job, I have to say, at least in our downtown area, to the most part, as far as how they stage them. And so if we can see that going forward and it works well, then there wouldn't be any reason not to keep going. So we were just trying to figure out how do we start off with, so we have the resources as a city to keep up with it. I think that's really the key.
Thank you. Well, I think we have a feel for the overall, it might be good to go ahead and have a motion just complying, or,
Well, we'll just bring direction. We'll bring you back the ordinance
Okay.
with the specifics and kind of go through this one more time with,
Right.
and obviously an updated map here. And Mr. Smith will give us another instruction on insurance and indemnification at that point, so.
right. So I think that's clearly our consensus. Do we need a motion? Okay.
No, I think it's
All right,
just
you're
direction.
good.
We just want to make sure we're heading in
You've
the
heard
right
what we
direction,
said.
so.
All right. Thank you very much. Any other comments on this? Okay. Next, thank you very much, gentlemen. The next item on our agenda is item 3, to acknowledge receipt of various board minutes. Is there a motion to that effect? Thank you. Second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Item 4 is to hear reports on meetings and conferences attended. Mr. Luna.
2 things. I just returned from Mexico City. There's a real interest in aerospace, working with both countries. So had opportunity to speak with some military brass from Mexico. And so that was really positive. The other thing is today you and myself went to Falcon Field Airport when we unveiled a historic picture of Cadet Oswaldo Interiano. It's a 38-foot photographic wrap that is being installed in the air traffic control tower. So if you're flying into Falcon Field, you can't miss it. and I would encourage you to go look at it. It really does commemorate our airport, and it's nice, you know, it's in 1941 when it was built, and it commemorates all these pilots that were trained. In fact, Councilmember Duff knew one of the, possibly one of the pilots there, and her family. So it was a great opportunity to be there to celebrate that wonderful accomplishment. So anyway, so congratulations to Falcon Field Airport.
Yeah, I'll second that. We have now the coolest air traffic control tower of any airport that I know, so it very classy. I thought it was a very nice event. Anything else?
Really
Mr.
quick,
Yeah.
this Saturday, we had a outreach event at Sycamore Apartments, so give a shout out to Mesa Fire, Mesa Police Department, Mesa Library, Mesa Parks and Rec, and a couple other MCC for being out there for the outreach event that we had at these apartments, so thank you.
Anything else?
Oh, I have to throw in
Yeah.
the event of the week,
Oh, yes.
which is the Guinness World Record
yeah.
for goat yoga at Mesa Amphitheater on Saturday. We had 351 people and 84 goats. Assistant Manager Carrie Kent was there officiating and doing the count, as well as I attended. And we did goat yoga, and it was a very fun event.
There's a lot of rules to get this record. It's very efficient.
Yes, yes.
Did we get the record?
Yes. Well, it was the first inaugural record.
There hasn't been a record set yet, so we.
It's the first.
So it's the first, so we think we have a good shot, but we.
the bar?
Yes,
The
but we.
goat yoga was actually invented, she's from Mesa.
Yeah,
or-
yeah.
And I know
Once-
they have it down in Gilbert, so nationally, we can claim we're responsible for inventing goat yoga as from our residents here.
It's a big deal.
So it was only fitting that we had the Guinness World Record here.
It was a historic day.
Little do we know that the Sherpas have been doing this for years.
You know, I never had, felt tempted to want to participate in goat yoga until I saw the photographs that were posted on social media. It actually looks like a lot of fun.
We'll pull you in next time,
Yes,
for sure.
thank you.
I'll give you a go.
Yeah, we go.
BYOG, and Mr. Freeman can go too. Any other announcements, council? If not, Mr. Brady, what do we need to know about our schedule?
Just a reminder, we have a study session on this Thursday, the 28th, and it'll also include a Eastmark Community Facilities District Board meeting. So we'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We are adjourned, and we will see you upstairs.